Kushal Mehra sounds alarm on Canada's immigration impact, calls for urgent reform. At a time when immigration debates are dominating Canada's political arena, Kushal Mehra, host of the Kvaka podcast and a Canadian of Indian origin, has stepped into the spotlight with bold and unsettling truths. Speaking at the recent United Against Extremism conference in Toronto, Mehra delivered a passionate critique of the current state of Canada's immigration system. His message was clear. If Canadians continue to ignore the consequences of mass migration and its political misuse, the social fabric of the country could face long-term damage. What makes his voice unique is not only his background as an immigrant, but his willingness to question policies that many others shy away from for fear of backlash. One of Mehra's core concerns is the selective interpretation of diversity in Canadian politics. As a Punjabi himself, he openly questioned why 22 out of all Indian origin MPs currently serving in Parliament are Punjabi, while other Indian subgroups such as Gujaratis, Tamils, and Malayalis have little to no political representation. In a country that prides itself on multiculturalism and inclusion, this imbalance is striking. Mehra argued that Canada's version of diversity has become superficial, emphasizing optics over true representation across subcultures, even within large immigrant communities. He went further to challenge the idea that immigration is an inherent right. According to Mehra, this widely held belief has blurred the lines between humanitarian compassion and national responsibility. Immigration, in his view, should be seen as a privilege granted by a sovereign country, based on merit, need, and integrity. Yet over the years, this principle has been eroded by what he calls a global victimhood culture, where claiming marginalization becomes a fast track to public sympathy and policy leniency. This has made Canada's immigration system highly vulnerable to exploitation by well-organized interest groups. Mehra's warning doesn't stop at philosophical observations. He raised red flags about specific systemic failures that have been ignored or even abetted by elected officials. One major concern is the proliferation of fake colleges, also known as diploma mills, in places like Brampton, Ontario. These institutions often serve as little more than entry points into Canada under the guise of education. According to Mehra, some of these schools offer facilities worse than those found in rural India. They function primarily to generate immigration credentials rather than actual education, and are enabled by immigration consultants working in tandem with politically connected individuals. This brings him to the deeper issue of corruption and political complicity. Mehra boldly stated that several members of parliament are not only aware of these loopholes but benefit from them directly or indirectly. These MPs help maintain a system where consultants and fake institutions funnel unqualified migrants into Canada, creating both a demographic shift and a labor mismatch. The result is an overflow of newcomers who are left to fend for themselves in underpaid, insecure gig jobs, further burdening the social system and fueling resentment from Canadian citizens who feel sidelined. While some may argue that Canada needs immigrants to fill labor shortages, Mehra noted that the current system fails to align immigration with actual economic needs. The country is short on skilled tradespeople, electricians, plumbers, welders, yet continues to admit individuals who often lack these in-demand skills. Instead of fixing the skills gap, the system generates an oversupply of low-wage workers in urban centers, competing for limited resources. Mehra emphasized that these immigrants are not at fault. They are victims of a broken, politicized pipeline that prioritizes volume over value. One of the most alarming issues Mehra addressed was the rise of extremism within immigrant communities, particularly related to Khalistani separatist movements. Until recently, political leaders across the spectrum avoided mentioning the issue, fearing backlash or being labeled intolerant. It was only after Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly addressed the concern in diplomatic conversations with India that the topic entered mainstream discourse. Mehra noted this shift as a dangerous indication that even national security threats are suppressed until politically convenient to acknowledge. Adding to the growing list of concerns, Mehra shed light on the exploitation of vulnerable individuals through immigration channels. He shared harrowing accounts of young women from India being trafficked into Canada under student or spousal visas and later forced into servitude or abuse. These stories have received little media attention, despite mounting evidence and years of advocacy from whistleblowers like Mehra. He argued that this silence isn't accidental. It's the byproduct of a media landscape afraid to challenge dominant narratives or politically sensitive issues. With Canada's institutions already overwhelmed, Mehra argued that simply closing borders or calling for mass deportations is not feasible. The reality, he says, is that the government already struggles to locate 6,000 undocumented migrants. Expecting enforcement systems to track down and deport hundreds of thousands more is unrealistic. Instead, he called for a rational approach. Identify who can be deported based on legal criteria, dismantle the corrupt academic networks, and invest in reskilling those already here to fill genuine labor shortages. Without such practical steps, the system will continue to spiral. Mehra also took aim at Canada's economic structure, warning that the country is relying too heavily on public sector employment and real estate to prop up its economy. He warned that this path is unsustainable and resembles fragile economies that lack real production or innovation. An immigration policy misaligned with economic priorities only amplifies the problem, especially when newcomers are funneled into sectors that don't build long-term national value. In his words, immigration should strengthen the nation, not stretch it to its limits. While many have pinned their hopes for reform on the new Liberal government under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Mehra remains skeptical that a change in leadership will lead to meaningful policy overhaul. He pointed out that many Conservative MPs have historically echoed similar immigration positions, advocating reforms without delivering substantive structural change. The problem, he argued, is systemic and nonpartisan. Political actors across the aisle have tolerated, if not enabled, the very conditions they now claim to oppose. Mehra ended his remarks with a call to action, not to politicians, but to Canadians themselves. He urged citizens to hold their MPs accountable, ask tough questions, and demand transparency in immigration and education systems. True reform, he argued, won't come from top-down policies alone but from bottom-up civic pressure. Only when average Canadians take ownership of these issues, challenge political complacency, and resist being gaslit by empty diversity slogans will the country have a chance at restoring a fair, functioning immigration framework.